What the hell just happened? My HOA president crashed her $50,000 SUV straight into my ranch fence, completely totaled the thing. And believe me, her car didn't survive what came next. For the past 2 years, this power-hungry woman has made it her personal mission to make my life miserable, all because I refused to sell my land. That decision cost her a hefty commission, and apparently, her pride couldn't handle it. The harassment she unleashed was off the charts. I tried to stay civil, tried to ignore it, but there comes a point when enough is enough. So when she came for my property again, she ran into something I'd set up just for her. Let's just say her shiny white SUV ended up looking like a unicorn had exploded all over it. The best part? Every single piece of it was perfectly legal. Stick around, because you won't believe how deep this rabbit hole goes. Comment where you're watching from, and if you've got HOA drama, I'm all ears. Let me take you back to where this all started. 2 years ago, I bought a beautiful ranch property right on the edge of Meadow View. A picture-perfect suburban neighborhood where the lawns are manicured, the mailboxes match, and everyone pretends to be friendly while whispering behind closed doors. My property, thankfully, sits just outside the HOA boundary line. That means I don't have to answer to their absurd rules about grass length or the shade of white allowed on fences. I'm Ethan Caldwell. I'm 32 years old, and I fix cars for a living. When I'm not buried under a hood, I'm taking care of my 5 rescue dogs. Beautiful mutts with more heart than most people I've met. The fence I built wasn't just wood and nails. It was protection. It was love. Every plank I hammered in was a promise that no one would hurt them again. The trouble with Pamela Thornton started before I ever met her face to face. Shortly after I closed on the ranch, she came strolling up my driveway, all smiles and business cards, talking fast about some development deal. She pitched the idea of selling my land to a commercial buyer. How it would be great for the neighborhood, how I'd make a small fortune, how it would elevate Meadow View. I just sipped my coffee, my dog sniffing her overpriced heels, and politely told her no. Her face? Pure shock. You'd think I had just stomped on her dreams in front of a live audience. What I didn't know at the time was that Pamela had already promised that deal to one of her clients, had even banked on a $50,000 commission. I didn't just ruin her deal. I embarrassed her. And that was unforgivable in her world. Fast forward to last summer's neighborhood picnic. I made the mistake of showing up with a bowl of potato salad and the naive hope of community bonding. Pamela was holding court near the gazebo, surrounded by her board members like royalty. The second she saw me, her face twisted into this fake smile. Then she raised her wine glass and shouted, "Oh look, it's our local eyesore enthusiast." She waved her hand toward my property. "That fence is bringing down our property values. It looks like something out of a horror movie." A few folks laughed. Some just looked uncomfortable. Clara Bennett, who lives a few houses down, didn't laugh. She just watched. I smiled, scooped some coleslaw onto my plate, and said, "Funny. My dogs think it's a masterpiece. They've got very refined taste." 3 days later, a letter showed up. Crisp, white envelope. Gold HOA logo. Inside was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive nonsense. According to Pamela, my fence violated 17 different guidelines that didn't even apply to my property. She cited height variations, visual disharmony, and a whole bunch of HOA jargon that basically boiled down to, "Join us or else." The letter suggested I voluntarily join the HOA to resolve matters amicably, or face action. I laughed. Pamela was bluffing. My dad taught me to stand up to bullies, especially the kind who hide behind clipboards and inflated job titles. But Pamela wasn't done. Next, she turned to social media. She posted pictures of my fence on the Meadow View HOA Facebook page, warning about safety concerns and declining property values. She played the role of the concerned citizen beautifully. The comments exploded. Some supported her, others questioned her motives. A local blog even picked up the story and gave me a nickname, the Ranch Rebel. Apparently, I was now a symbol, depending on who you asked, either a hero or a menace. I fought back with humor. I posted a photo of my 5 rescue dogs lounging by the fence, tails wagging, tongues out. Free fence tours available. Dog cuddles included, I wrote. The post got triple the engagement Pamela's rant had. Sophia Morales, who's had her own HOA run-ins, commented, "This is the content we need." Even grumpy old Walter Hayes shared it with the caption, "Good fences make good dogs." It felt like a small win. I figured that would be the end of it. She made her move, I made mine. Time to move on, right? Wrong. One night, I couldn't sleep. I had that prickly feeling, like I was being watched. So I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. My dog stayed close, alert but calm. And there she was, Pamela Thornton, at midnight, in yoga pants that had never seen a yoga mat, sneaking along my fence line with her phone out, snapping pictures of every single nail and board. She ducked behind my mailbox when a car passed. I stood there in the dark, watching this grown woman play spy in the suburbs. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about the fence. This wasn't about the neighborhood. This was personal. I was a threat to her pride, her control, and her reputation. And she was going to keep coming until I pushed back. The next day, I found a city code violation stuck to my gate, issued just hours after her little midnight mission. It threatened a hefty fine that would force me to tear down my fence and risk my dog's safety. That was her line in the sand. And mine? Well, mine came with consequences. What would you do if your neighbor tried to force you off your land using lies, letters, and dirty tricks? Let me know in the comments. Because for me, that night marked the beginning of a whole new kind of war, and I wasn't going down without a fight. That was the official citation number. It claimed my fence posed an imminent threat to public safety and accused it of being an attractive nuisance, legal speak for something that might draw in curious kids and get someone hurt, opening the door to lawsuits and municipal liability. The fine started at $500, which was bad enough, but the letter didn't stop there. It warned of daily penalties that could quickly balloon to $5,000 if I didn't act within 10 days. Worse yet, it came with a threat that the city might forcibly remove the fence at my expense. At the bottom of the citation was a familiar name, Richard Hoffman. A quick search through social media confirmed my suspicion. Richard was Pamela's cousin by marriage. Of course he was. The nepotism practically dripped off the page. The complaint cited obscure and wildly vague municipal codes that could apply to anything from a quaint garden gate to the Great Wall of China. It referenced absurd language about structural uniformity and aesthetic compliance that sounded more like a cover for personal vendettas than enforceable law. Pamela had clearly pulled some strings, leaned on her well-oiled connections at City Hall, probably called in a few favors from her real estate cronies. She had weaponized the very machinery of local government and turned it into her personal wrecking ball. And the most infuriating part? This was only the beginning. The next morning, I headed to City Hall, armed with every legal document I could find: property surveys, building permits, the original deed, even Department of Defense paperwork just in case. I wore a polite smile that never quite reached my eyes, but stayed in place like a mask. The place smelled of stale coffee and aging copier toner, the lights overhead flickering in a way that made everyone look slightly ill. Behind the counter was Jessica, a young woman who had graduated with my kid sister. She looked uncomfortable the second she saw the citation. Her eyes darted to her supervisor's office before she leaned in and whispered, "Mr. Caldwell, between you and me, Richard didn't want to write this ticket. But you know how it is, when certain people start making calls, especially ones who write fat checks to political campaigns, pressure gets applied." She tapped away at her ancient computer, pulling up my records with a speed that came from years of navigating a flawed system. After 15 minutes of searching and cross-referencing municipal ordinances, she finally looked up, relief evident on her face. "Your fence is perfectly legal," she said, spinning the monitor toward me. "It's entirely within your property lines, meets every height and setback requirement, and even exceeds the structural standards for wind resistance. Honestly, it's one of the best fences in the neighborhood." With a loud, satisfying thunk, she stamped the citation void. It echoed through the quiet office like a gavel in a courtroom. But we both knew better. This battle might be won, but the war had just begun. I left City Hall with a file of documents and a ticket that no longer held weight, muttering under my breath, "Pamela's not after a fence, she's after control. This is about power and revenge." 2 days later, the real confrontation came. It was a Saturday morning, when normal people were sleeping in, maybe enjoying pancakes or a slow cup of coffee. Me? I was already on my second mug, changing the oil in Mrs. Patterson's Honda Civic. She's 93 years old and still insists on driving herself to church every Sunday. Sweet as pie, stubborn as a mule. Out of nowhere, Pamela's white SUV screeched into my driveway, like she was arriving at a crime scene. She stormed out in a power suit despite the blazing heat, her hair frozen in a helmet-like style that seemed immune to sweat or humidity. Her heels clicked against the gravel with all the subtlety of a military parade. "Ethan," she barked, skipping any pretense of civility. "We need to discuss your situation." Immediately. I didn't look up right away. Just kept working, slowly draining the old oil, cleaning my tools with deliberate care. "My situation," I repeated, dragging out the word, "is that I legally own this property, built a fence that meets every code, and I mind my own damn business." She let out a sharp laugh, cold and bitter like a knife in a freezer. "Don't play dumb. Your mutts, your junk fence, they're done, Ethan. I've got serious developers interested in this land. You're standing in the way of real progress." She waved her phone in front of my face, showing me glossy mock-ups of strip malls and parking lots overlaying what was, currently, my peaceful little ranch. I stood up slowly, looked her in the eye. "Keep dreaming, Pamela. This is my home. Those dogs are family. And that fence, that stays exactly where it is." The silence stretched between us, heavy and tense. Across the street, Sophia Morales was watering her flowers, which really meant pretending not to eavesdrop with a garden hose in hand. Even my dogs in the backyard had gone still, sensing the storm. Pamela's smile cracked. "You think this is over? You cost me a $50,000 commission and embarrassed me in front of serious clients. Now you're making me look weak to the HOA board." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "I will bury you in so much legal red tape you won't know which way is up. And when you break, and you will, you'll be lucky to walk away with pocket change." She turned on her heel, stormed back to her SUV, and peeled off. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, Sophia knocked on my door holding a six-pack of local craft beer in one hand and a bulging manila folder in the other. "Figured you might need both," she said with a wry smile as she settled onto the porch swing. The folder was gold, 3 months' worth of HOA meeting minutes, collected through what she called creative borrowing from a recycling bin. We combed through them together. A clear pattern emerged. Pamela had been using city complaints and HOA fines as tools to pressure homeowners into selling. One by one, she'd chipped away at properties near mine. And my ranch? It was the prize, 20 acres of prime land that could link 2 major commercial zones. In the latest notes, she proposed a special assessment to address so-called security concerns caused by non-conforming lots. Mine was named outright. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Walter Hayes, short and cryptic. "Pamela's circling. I've got proof of her old scams. Come by tomorrow. Bring coffee. The good stuff. Not that gas station swill." Walter wasn't the type to exaggerate, and he sure wasn't one for small talk. If he was reaching out, it meant things were serious. As the night wore on, Sophia filled me in on more of Pamela's antics. "That white SUV she drives," she said, pointing toward the street. "It's leased under the HOA's name. She's been draining community funds while pretending to protect the neighborhood." Later that night, the community blog lit up. HOA president targets ranch property. The comments exploded. Debate, anger, support, confusion. The tide was turning, but not necessarily in my favor. Pamela had years of political maneuvering behind her. She knew how to build alliances and twist narratives. Just before midnight, I caught her in the act. Her SUV was parked by my fence, engine still running. She was slapping a bright orange sticker onto one of my fence posts, another bogus citation. By the time I stepped outside, she was already pulling away. But that was fine. Let her run. Because this time, I was ready to chase. The damage was already done. A bright, official-looking sticker was slapped onto my fence, declaring it under HOA review for multiple violations. I tore it off, my fingers trembling, and not just from anger. As I peeled it away, I remembered how Pamela's SUV had swerved erratically as she sped off, like she couldn't get away fast enough. The next morning, I stepped outside to find something far worse. Spray painted in thick, red letters across my fence were the words, "Dog Killer." Each letter was over a foot tall, bold and brutal, impossible to miss even from the road. Pamela was no longer just passive-aggressively flexing her power. She was coming after everything I loved. And I knew it wasn't going to stop here. How would you handle a neighbor vandalizing your home? Tell me your comeback in the comments. Because mine was still forming in the pit of my gut, where anger and disbelief churned together. But it wasn't just those two words. Slurs and threats were splashed across other sections of the fence. Slum, danger, IO, whatever that was supposed to mean. It looked like a teenager's rage against the world, except I knew exactly whose rage this was. Pamela had turned my fence into her personal hate billboard. The paint was still tacky when I found it. 6 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, expecting peace and finding chaos. The scent of aerosol lingered, mixing with the delicate perfume of morning jasmine from my neighbor's yard. It was surreal, the beauty of dawn beside the ugliness of a grudge. I followed my gut and headed to the garage. Behind a dusty toolbox, just barely concealed, were 3 empty spray paint cans, red, black, and white. The exact shades smeared across my fence. I'd seen those same cans before. Last week, inside the trunk of Pamela's white SUV when she was unloading groceries. She hadn't even bothered to hide them. My blood boiled. I didn't think. I reacted. My boot connected with an old tire, sending it skittering down the driveway. But rage wasn't going to be enough. This wasn't just random vandalism. This was a calculated smear campaign meant to isolate me, humiliate me, and stir up fear among my neighbors. And it was working. Curtains twitched across the street. Nosy neighbors with morning routines were getting an eyeful. By 7:30 a.m., the Meadowview Matters blog had already posted multiple photos with the headline, "Ranch Fence Vandalized. Feud Escalates to Criminal Damage." The blogger had captured everything. Close-ups of the drips, wide shots of the fence, even one photo that showed the reflection of red letters in a puddle. Comments came fast. Some expressed sympathy. Others accused me of doing it myself to gain attention. The worst part? That seed of doubt planted in people's minds. But not everyone was fooled. One comment stood out, from Clara Bennett, the neighborhood's unofficial voice of reason. "This is deeply troubling. Regardless of anyone's stance on property disputes, vandalism is never acceptable." Clara wasn't on my side exactly, but she was honest. And Pamela had just crossed a moral line Clara wouldn't ignore. Still, I needed more than support. I needed proof. So that afternoon, I installed cameras. Strategic ones, covering every vulnerable inch of my property. It was a long, sweaty job under the blazing sun, but the heat didn't bother me. My fury kept me going. If Pamela wanted to wage war in the shadows, I'd drag her into the light, recorded in high definition. I didn't even have to wait long. At exactly 2:13 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and froze. There she was, Pamela, dressed head to toe in black, creeping along my fence like some clumsy suburban ninja. She thought she was clever. She'd parked her SUV down the road, probably assuming the distance would keep her anonymous. But she made mistakes. She pulled down her mask to wipe the sweat from her face. She cursed when she tripped over a tree root. She took her time with the spray can, adding the word leave in bold strokes, carefully drawn to look intimidating. I recorded every second, saved it to multiple devices. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a deep, hard satisfaction. This wasn't just evidence. It was justice. The president of the HOA was a criminal, caught red-handed with a spray can and a personal vendetta. The next morning, 2 people showed up before I'd even finished my breakfast. First was Sophia, storming up my porch with fresh muffins and fire in her eyes. "Everyone's talking about the new graffiti," she said, phone already in hand. Pamela's playing the victim. She posted about security concerns and called for an emergency HOA meeting. "She's implying you did this." The post was filled with coded language, carefully crafted to twist public perception. But Sophia wasn't fooled. "Show them the footage," she demanded. "Expose her for what she really is." But I hesitated. I wasn't ready to set fire to the battlefield just yet. "Not yet," I told her. "Let her think she's winning. Overconfidence makes people sloppy." Not 10 minutes later, Walter Hayes showed up. He didn't knock. He just walked onto my porch like he owned it, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat down in my rocking chair like it was his. "Saw your new paint job," he said, stone-faced. "Reminds me of something from a few years back." He pulled out a flip phone. Yes, a real flip phone, and played a crackly audio file. Pamela's voice cut through the air, sharp and venomous. "You can sell your farm to my clients now, or I'll make your life so miserable you'll beg me to." Then she added something about forged documents, wetlands, and federal violations. Walter shrugged. She almost got me. Had to hire 3 lawyers to prove she was bluffing. Cost me 20 grand and 2 years. He looked me dead in the eye. She's doing the same thing to you, boy. Same strategy, different disguise. And she's not alone. That developer's still out there. They want your land. Everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a petty feud. Pamela was part of a bigger plan, one that involved money, manipulation, and a long history of pushing out landowners. Later that afternoon, while I was under Mrs. Patterson's Toyota fixing her alternator, my phone rang. Unknown number. It was 911 dispatch. Mr. Caldwell, the voice said, we received a report that you threatened someone at an HOA meeting. I blinked. I've never even been to an HOA meeting, I said, wiping grease from my hands. I've been here for the past 2 hours, fixing a car. Still have to send officers, sir, the dispatcher said, sounding tired. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Mrs. Patterson confirmed my alibi, and the officers looked as exhausted by the situation as I felt. Officer Martinez closed his notepad with a sigh. Let me guess, neighbor dispute. I nodded. He shook his head. 3rd false report this month involving your HOA. As they left, I spotted her. Pamela, sitting in her car at the end of the street, phone to her ear. Watching. Smirking. She had actually filed a false police report. Risked criminal charges just to try and rattle me. But this time, it had backfired. The blog updated again. Police called to ranch property. False alarm raises questions. And this time, the tide was turning. Comments flooded in, some angry, some disbelieving, but many asking the same thing. Why is this woman still in charge of the HOA? Clara Bennett posted again. False police reports are serious crimes. They endanger lives and waste public resources. Enough is enough. Enough, indeed. Pamela had declared war. But she'd underestimated one thing. I fight smart. And I don't back down. Our entire community could feel it. The tide was starting to turn. People were beginning to see Pamela for what she really was. But I knew her. Pamela wasn't the type to back down. And just as I feared, she went even further. One afternoon, I got a call from animal control. Apparently, Pamela had reported my dogs as dangerous. That was the line. That was the moment I realized she'd gone too far. I mean, think about it. If someone tried to take your pets away, what would you do? Would you fight? Would you protect them? Share your battle plan in the comments, because this was mine. Chapter 4, The Dog Debacle. Pamela had filed an official complaint, claiming my dogs had viciously attacked her during her morning walk. She even showed the authorities scratch marks on her arms. Marks that, frankly, looked freshly made and suspiciously like she'd done them to herself. Not a single person who knew my dogs would believe they were aggressive. But official complaints meant official action. The guy who showed up at my gate was a young animal control officer named Marcus. Before he even spoke, I could see the discomfort in his eyes. Mr. Caldwell, he said, almost apologetically, I've got to investigate this complaint. But, between you and me, something just doesn't sit right here. He peered through the fence and watched my dogs for a moment. Max wagged his tail like he'd just found a long-lost friend. Bella rolled joyfully in the grass. Duke carried his tennis ball with a proud bounce in his step. Luna hid shyly behind the water bowl, and Rusty snored contentedly in the shade. These are the vicious killers? Marcus asked, half laughing. He did what he had to, checked their behavior, reviewed vaccination records, and listened patiently as I told him how each of them had come into my life. After about an hour, he snapped his clipboard shut and said firmly, "These dogs are about as dangerous as a row of stuffed animals. I'll be filing a report stating there's no aggressive behavior." But even with that small relief, I knew this was just Pamela's next chess move, and I had no illusion she'd stop there. As Marcus drove away, I stood by the fence, stroking Max's head through the slats. My mind drifted to the day I adopted him, just 3 weeks after my dad's funeral. The silence in the house back then had been unbearable. I'd gone to the shelter not to adopt, just to look. But Max had walked up to the bars of his kennel and pressed his nose to the cage like he knew what loss felt like, too. The shelter worker told me he'd been passed over for months, 8 of them, because he wasn't young or flashy enough. That night, I found my dad's last letter tucked inside his old toolbox. He'd written it when he knew the cancer was winning. "Stand tall, son. The world's full of people who'll try to knock you down. But you've got my stubborn streak. Use it. With Max's head in my lap and that letter in my hands, I made a promise to protect every dog that needed me, just like Dad protected everyone he loved. And now Pamela was trying to take that promise from me. The fury that built in my chest could have lit a city block. Later that evening, I got a text from Sophia. "Pamela's lost it. She's going after your dogs? No one in Meadowview will stand for that." She was right. If there's one thing our neighborhood cares about, it's animals. But this wasn't about winning anyone's sympathy anymore. Pamela had stopped caring about appearances. An hour later, Walter called. His voice had the weathered grit of a man who'd seen too much. "She tried that on me 20 years ago," he said. "Claimed my cows were a health hazard. Said they attracted rats. Took the state agriculture department to shut her down." That wasn't just a story, it was a warning. Pamela knew how to play the system, and she knew where to poke until it hurt. The idea that my dogs could be taken, even for a day, made my hands tremble. That night, as I scooped kibble into their bowls, each clink felt like a quiet act of rebellion. A promise. A war cry. Whatever Pamela thought this was, she had no idea how far I was willing to go. 3 nights later, it escalated. A crash outside jolted me from sleep. My security cameras lit up, catching every detail in high definition. Pamela's white SUV parked crooked along the back road. She stumbled out with a crowbar in hand and started methodically loosening the fence posts. This wasn't some heat-of-the-moment outburst. She knew exactly how to weaken the structure just enough to make it fail without leaving obvious damage. If the fence fell and the dogs got out, she could call animal control and claim they were loose, dangerous. And this time, she might just get her way. I ran outside, but by the time I got there, her taillights were already vanishing around the corner, 2 red eyes in the darkness. The next morning told the full story. 5 fence posts were loosened. When Duke leaned against the gate on his usual patrol, it swayed ominously. Tire tracks from her SUV were embedded in the soft earth, and, bless her arrogance, she dropped a hardware store receipt, timestamped just hours before. My dogs sensed it too. They avoided the damaged section instinctively, staying close to the house. I spent the entire day reinforcing the fence with every structural trick my father ever taught me. Steel brackets, reinforced beams, and bolts tightened like armor. "You're safe now," I whispered to them. But I wasn't sure if I was saying it for them or for myself. That night, I noticed a pattern. Every evening around 11 o'clock, Pamela parked in the exact same spot, right where the streetlight had burned out, binoculars in hand, spying on my yard. She thought the darkness hid her, but my cameras picked up the shine of her lenses and the glow of her phone screen. She was watching, hoping to catch something she could twist into a threat. But if she wanted to be that predictable, I could work with that. The ground there was soft, soggy from a busted sprinkler line and recent rain. I waited for her nightly visit, then got to work. By moonlight, I dug a small trench, 2 feet deep, angled toward my fence. I covered it with plywood, a dusting of dirt, some leaves. Just enough camouflage to hide it from her headlights. But I wasn't done. Dad's old paintball trap designs from the church youth group came to mind. I rigged 3 spray cans, red, blue, and yellow, connected to pressure tubes. If her tires slid into the trench and nudged the fence corner, they'd trigger a Technicolor explosion. It wasn't dangerous, just spectacularly messy and completely unexplainable. As I worked, I thought about how many times she'd tried to paint me as the villain. Now, she was about to get painted herself. Every part of the trap sat on my property, technically just landscaping, maybe even a quirky art project, but strategically positioned right where her nightly routine would lead her. And then, just after midnight, I heard it. A crunch, a shout, and the unmistakable hiss of pressurized paint filling the night air. Pamela wasn't going to take this lying down. So here's my question to you. What do you think she'll do next? Drop your wildest theories in the comments, because this battle's only just begun. Chapter 5. The paint-splattered crash begins right where the last ended, at midnight, with a rumble in the dark and a war line drawn in rainbow colors. She had no idea what was waiting beneath that thin piece of plywood. The second her front tires rolled over it, the trap sprang to life. The board snapped with a sound like a gunshot, echoing through the night. Her SUV lurched forward violently, the front end plunging nearly 2 feet into a hidden ditch I'd carefully shaped over the past week. The vehicle slid sideways, helpless against the slick, muddy slope. Momentum carried it exactly where I'd planned, right into the corner of my reinforced fence. It was as if physics and karma had shaken hands and decided tonight was the night. The impact was immediate and glorious. As her SUV crunched into the steel posts, the pressure plates I'd rigged did their job. 3 paint cans, red, blue, and yellow, erupted like geysers. Pressurized streams of vivid color exploded into the night, drenching the front of her once pristine, white SUV. The hood, the windshield, the doors, no surface was spared. It looked like a Technicolor storm had been waiting just for her. But that wasn't even the best part. Somehow, her driver's side window had been cracked open just enough. The force of the blast sent a wave of paint splattering inside. Pamela's perfectly styled hair and immaculately made-up face were suddenly a canvas of chaotic color. Then, with a pow, her airbag deployed, catching her off guard and launching her back against the seat. Her shriek of surprise mingled with the sound of car alarms and the hissing of paint still spraying from the cans. It was chaos, beautiful, poetic chaos. Her SUV now resembled a rolling Jackson Pollock exhibit, paint dripping in psychedelic patterns from every edge. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, curling around the splattered paint like smoke from a war zone. Through the streaked windshield, I could see her struggling to push the airbag away, her face twisted in rage, streaked with every primary color imaginable. That's when fate handed me the cherry on top. Dylan Bennett, Clara's teenage son, emerged from the shadows, phone in hand. He'd been sneaking out to meet his friends, and as luck would have it, he caught the whole thing on video, from the perfect angle. His whisper was barely audible over the distant chaos. "Oh man, this is gonna go viral." Within minutes, it was online. Captioned, "Crazy Karen vs. Karma, Paint Edition." The view count began to climb immediately. People couldn't get enough. Meanwhile, I stepped outside with deliberate calm, coffee mug in hand, like I'd just been enjoying a quiet evening. My heart was pounding like a drum, but my face? Composed, neutral, concerned. "Pamela," I called out, voice laced with faux surprise. "Are you all right?" She was crawling out of the vehicle now, slipping in the mud I'd made sure stayed just slick enough. Red paint ran in rivulets from her hair, blue streaks marred her blouse, and yellow splotches adorned her cheeks like some surreal war paint. She looked like she'd lost a brawl with a rainbow. "You did this," she screamed, her finger, coated in globs of dripping paint, pointing at me like a deranged, abstract artist mid-rage. "This is assault. Attempted murder. I'm calling the police." Her designer heels were useless in the mud, and she slipped again with a shriek, landing hard and splashing herself with even more earth tones. I stayed rooted on my property, steps away, feigning concern. "Did what?" I asked innocently. "Looks like you drove into my fence. Is that paint? Were you planning more graffiti?" I nodded toward the spray can still visible in the back seat of her SUV, the same brand she'd used before on my property. My security cameras had it all. With trembling, paint-covered fingers, she pulled out her phone and began dialing 911, her voice shifting from rage to practiced victimhood. "I've been attacked," she sobbed into the receiver. "This is a trap, a dangerous setup meant to harm innocent people." But even her dramatic monologue couldn't hide the facts. She'd trespassed on my land. At midnight. With vandalism tools. When the police arrived about 15 minutes later, they didn't need much convincing. Officer Martinez, the same one from her earlier false report, stepped out of his cruiser, took one long look at the scene, and sighed heavily. His partner, Officer Williams, was already snapping pictures. The tire tracks, the damaged fence, the strategically placed paint cans, the very obvious property line. Everything she touched was inside my yard. "Ma'am," Martinez asked, carefully, "can you explain why you were on Mr. Caldwell's property at midnight?" Pamela stammered, flakes of paint falling from her cheeks like colorful snow. "I was checking the neighborhood. That fence is dangerous." I was concerned for safety. But it all crumbled the moment I offered to show them the security footage. There she was, on camera, spray painting dog killer across my fence, loosening posts, and sneaking around night after night. And just to seal the deal, Dylan stepped forward with his own video. Crystal clear footage, front row seats to karma in real time. The officer's expressions grew more serious with each passing second. Then came the question. "The ditch?" Officer Williams asked. I shrugged. "Drainage project." Approved by the county last month. Flood prevention measures. All legal, all documented, and entirely on my land. Pamela's face, under all that paint, went pale. Officer Martinez calmly informed her she was being detained for trespassing, vandalism, and suspicion of intent to commit further damage. As they read her rights, she looked like a failed art project in handcuffs. "This is persecution," she wailed, eyes wild with fury. "He set me up? You don't understand. He's dangerous." But no one was buying it. The next day was pure digital magic. Dylan's video exploded online, racking up 1 million views before lunch. Comments poured in like wildfire. "Best karma ever. HOA Karen painted by the gods of justice." She finally got what she deserved. The clip needed no edits, no spin. The footage spoke for itself. Pamela's SUV tearing through my yard, the board snapping, the paint explosion like divine retribution in high definition. People turned it into memes, slow-motion clips, dramatic reenactments. Someone even synced the explosion to Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture. It was glorious, and it sparked something deeper. Residents across Meadowview flooded the HOA forums with their own stories: excessive fines, bullying letters, late-night threats. Years of silent resentment now had a voice, and Pamela had unknowingly painted herself into a corner. At the emergency HOA meeting that evening, she showed up with the stains still faint in her hairline. Gone was the power suit, replaced with a conservative dress that couldn't hide the humiliation. She tried to twist the narrative, claiming I'd created a deadly hazard that could have hurt children. But the room wasn't buying it. Then Clara Bennett stood up, normally shy, soft-spoken. "Pamela," she said clearly, "we all saw the video. You were trespassing. You vandalized property. This has gone too far." The room murmured in agreement. One by one, voices rose. Complaints. Stories. Years of fear and frustration. The paint trap had done more than catch a trespasser. It had blown the lid off everything. Pamela, still splattered in shame, vowed revenge from that muddy ditch. And her next move? Almost cost me everything. So how does Pamela fight back? Well, that's where things get even messier. After the paint disaster that went viral and had viewers predicting her revenge in the comments, Pamela didn't waste any time plotting her next move. The very next day after being released from overnight detention, she sent out urgent notices calling for an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Saturday morning. The notice described her as a victim, someone who had been subjected to relentless, targeted harassment, and now needed the community's support more than ever. She showed up looking disheveled but determined, her expression carefully crafted to evoke sympathy. She even limped slightly as she walked in, an injury that, quite clearly, hadn't existed the day before. But Pamela was no amateur. Her presentation was a masterclass in performance and manipulation. She had a full PowerPoint prepared, showcasing strategically cropped and heavily edited photos of my property taken from the worst possible angles. She even included graphs claiming a sharp decline in neighborhood property values, charts that were completely fabricated to fit her narrative. "For 15 years, she said, voice cracking just enough to sound genuine, "I've dedicated myself to upholding the standards of Meadowview. And this is how I'm repaid? Attacked, humiliated, for doing my job." She paused for dramatic effect, then pulled out a tissue and dabbed at her dry eyes. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and to my horror, some residents began whispering to each other, buying into her act. I could hear snippets. Maybe she's right. What if he really is dangerous? Pamela had learned from the backlash of the paint incident. She avoided directly accusing me of anything. Instead, she masterfully planted seeds of doubt with every carefully chosen word, weaving a narrative that made her look like the martyr in a community under siege. Then came the bombshell. With practiced composure, Pamela announced she was filing a lawsuit against me for $50,000. The exact amount of the commission she'd lost 2 years ago when I exposed her shady dealings. Her attorney, Morrison, a sharp-dressed, silver-tongued legal shark, stood beside her and began laying out the claims. Assault, emotional distress, property damage to her precious SUV. "My client has suffered tremendous harm," Morrison declared with theatrical indignation, "both physically and emotionally, as a result of this calculated attack." He presented photos of the SUV, close-ups of scratches and paint stains. There were medical reports claiming paint inhalation trauma. Even a note from a therapist diagnosing Pamela with post-traumatic stress. Yes, PTSD from the paint incident. The lawsuit paperwork was massive, thick enough to use as a doorstop, dense with legal jargon, and clearly intended to overwhelm me. That night, I sat in my garage surrounded by tools and fading memories of my father. The cold grip of financial ruin settled on my shoulders. I didn't have the savings to survive a prolonged legal war, and Pamela knew it. This wasn't about justice. It was about draining me dry until I had no choice but to sell. But the next morning, hope arrived. Sophia came by, laptop in hand, with Walter following close behind. And what they brought changed everything. I kept checking that leaked HOA account access, Sophia explained, pulling up emails. Pamela got sloppy after the paint incident. Look at this, sent straight from her email account to Morrison, a full week before it all went down. The message was damning. The mechanic won't last much longer. Once we force the sale, Hartley Development will pay triple our usual finder's fee. That ranch connects their two parcels perfectly. We'll split the $50,000 bonus, as discussed. But that was just the beginning. Sophia had dug deeper. She uncovered receipts for Pamela's white SUV lease, billed directly to the HOA as an administrative vehicle expense. There were consulting fees paid to Morrison's firm for community planning services that never actually happened. Walter's research was even more devastating. He'd visited the county records office, tracked down victims, and gathered ironclad evidence. "Remember that audio recording I played?" he said. Turns out Pamela pulled this same wetlands violation scam on 3 other homeowners. 2 caved and sold under pressure, but 1 fought back and kept everything. He spread documents across my kitchen table, forged environmental assessments, falsified surveys, and a notarized statement from a former city employee who'd been fired after refusing to cooperate with Pamela's scheme. "She's been working with Hartley Development this entire time," Walter said grimly. "Every forced sale, every fraudulent citation, it's all part of a land grab for their mega project. Your ranch isn't just valuable. It's the last piece of the puzzle." Everything suddenly made sense. My property was the keystone for Hartley's massive commercial expansion. And Pamela? She wasn't just vindictive. She was a mercenary, selling out the neighborhood piece by piece. I knew what I had to do. At the next HOA meeting, I arrived early and quietly set up my own presentation. Pamela was already there, schmoozing with her loyalists, completely unaware of what was coming. When it was my turn to speak, I connected my laptop to the projector. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding. "Before we talk about lawsuits and property values," I began, "I think everyone deserves to know where their HOA dues have really been going." Slide after slide told the story, starting with the finder's fee email. Gasps echoed through the room. Then came the SUV lease, the fake consulting fees, the forced sales. And finally, Walter's bombshell: forged documents, fraud patterns, and testimony linking Pamela directly to Hartley Development. The room exploded. Clara Bennett, usually the calm voice of reason, stood up, her tone sharp with fury. "We've been funding Pamela's personal business deals. She used our community, our money, as a weapon against us." The crowd erupted in outrage. Residents who'd been fined into submission realized they'd been conned. Pamela tried to speak, but her voice cracked and faltered. "These are lies, fabrications," she stammered. But when someone pointed to the finder's fee email and asked for an explanation, she had none. Morrison, her lawyer, was already packing up, ready to abandon ship. Amid the chaos, motions were made. An immediate audit. Pamela's removal. The vote. Unanimous. Clara, now interim HOA president, filed a formal complaint with the state attorney's office. An investigation followed. The findings were explosive. Over $200,000 stolen from HOA funds, funneled through fake vendors, padded contracts, and fraudulent reimbursements. Hartley Development couldn't deny their involvement when payment trails led directly back to them. Pamela was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and filing false reports. Her real estate license was suspended. Her prized white SUV, still faintly stained with blue paint, was impounded. At her arraignment, the judge watched Dylan Bennett's viral paint video not once, but twice. The second time, he even smiled. Pamela's bail? A poetic $50,000, the exact amount she tried to sue me for. As she was led away in handcuffs, she shot me one last glare. But it was empty. The fire was gone. She looked like someone who realized, too late, that she had played herself into checkmate. Within a month, her house went on the market. Proceeds were used for restitution. Walter got an apology and full compensation for legal fees from years ago. Under Clara's leadership, the HOA transformed. Fines were refunded. Books were opened. Transparency returned. It was over. Or so I thought. Because just as things were settling down, Morrison, Pamela's now former lawyer, approached me privately with a warning. "There's something you don't know," he said, eyes dark. Pamela wasn't finished. She kept one card hidden. One final move. So now I ask you, what do you think Pamela's secret weapon is? What's the ace up her sleeve she's about to play from behind bars? Drop your wildest theories in the comments. Because this war might not be over after all. The day before the main trial, Morrison requested a private meeting, claiming he had information that would fundamentally change the course of the entire case. Curious but cautious, I arrived at his office with Sophia and my attorney by my side. There was a heavy silence in the room as we walked in. Morrison, usually composed and calculating, looked visibly uncomfortable. He kept fidgeting with his expensive pen, tapping it nervously against the mahogany desk. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, packed with documents. My client instructed me to reveal this only if absolutely necessary. He began, his sharp, rehearsed demeanor softening into something that almost resembled a guilty conscience. But given the criminal implications, I'm ethically obligated to disclose it. He pushed the folder toward us. I opened it, and my heart dropped. Inside were contracts, land surveys, legal documents, and detailed architectural blueprints. What I saw made my blood run cold. Pamela hadn't been randomly harassing property owners out of petty HOA vendettas. She had been executing a carefully crafted 10-year master plan with Hartley Development. The goal? To build a massive commercial complex that required exactly one missing piece, my 20-acre ranch. Without it, their development couldn't connect or legally expand. But what truly turned my stomach was the twist. She had already filed fraudulent paperwork 6 months prior, claiming a utility easement across my property, all based on forged documents supposedly dating back to 1942. These weren't amateur fakes either. They were disturbingly convincing, complete with artificially aged paper, historically accurate typefaces, and fake legal language crafted to look like a legitimate easement granted for the public good. It was a lie designed to bypass legal scrutiny, banking on the assumption that no one would dare challenge documents that appeared to be over 80 years old. Had it worked, Hartley Development would have been legally empowered to run roads, sewage lines, and utilities straight through the heart of my ranch, effectively destroying its value, slicing it in half, and forcing me to sell. But Morrison wasn't done. He leaned in, his voice low. "She's done this before," he said. 3 years ago, Walter Hayes's farm was targeted the same way. When he fought back, Pamela withdrew the forged claim, but kept copies, refining her methods, learning from the pushback. That was when the scale of this operation truly hit me. This wasn't just about harassment. My rejection of her initial $50,000 offer hadn't just bruised her ego. It had jeopardized a multi-million-dollar development deal she had been orchestrating ever since she became HOA president. Every petty complaint, every bogus fine, every escalation, it had all been calculated. A psychological siege meant to wear me down before she pulled her final move, the fraudulent easement. Morrison, now clearly disgusted, revealed even more. Pamela hadn't just stolen money from the HOA out of greed. She had already accepted $300,000 in advance commissions from Hartley Development for properties she had promised but hadn't delivered. Now they were breathing down her neck. He showed us a string of desperate emails between Pamela and Hartley's executives, emails demanding results and threatening to expose her if she failed. One email, dated 3 months ago, read, "Thornton, you've had 2 years to acquire the Caldwell property. Our investors are out of patience. Deliver the land or return the money, with interest." Pamela's reply was chilling. She assured them she had a permanent solution in motion. That message was sent just days before the graffiti attacks began. Suddenly, the vandalism made sense. It wasn't random. It was part of her plan to paint me as unstable, unfit to manage my land, So when she produced those fake easement documents, the county would believe her. The strategy was cruelly brilliant. I called Walter Hayes that night, and he confirmed every word. She tried the same thing with my land, he growled. Claimed my great-grandfather gave developers rights he never gave. Cost me 30 grand in legal fees just to disprove her lies. But Walter had something Pamela didn't know about: a complete forensic analysis of her previous forgeries. It documented everything: artificial aging on the paper, legal phrasing inconsistent with the era, even subtle typos that exposed her fraudulent templates. Meanwhile, Clara Bennett had quietly uncovered another layer of rot. Several HOA board members had received mysterious gifts from Hartley Development: vacation packages, sudden home improvements, consulting checks, all coinciding suspiciously with key votes that furthered Pamela's agenda. The corruption wasn't limited to her. It had infected nearly every corner of our community leadership. That night, we called an emergency HOA meeting. The room was electric, crackling with tension and suspicion. I laid out everything: Morrison's testimony, the forged documents, Walter's evidence, and the shady connections between Pamela and Hartley. Then came the final blow. Morrison had secretly recorded a video confession. Pamela, believing attorney-client privilege would protect her, casually laughed as she admitted it all. "Nobody checks old papers," she said on the video. "You give them yellowed paper and a county stamp, and they just nod. Ethan's land. It's mine. It's just business." The room erupted. Neighbors gasped, some cried, others shouted. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone had imagined. She hadn't just stolen from us. She had sold out our entire neighborhood for personal gain. Clara stood up and demanded criminal charges. The vote was unanimous. Someone had already called the police. And as if scripted, Pamela walked in halfway through, still believing she could spin the situation. But Officer Martinez was waiting. "Pamela Thornton," he said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted grand theft through falsified documentation." No amount of charm or manipulation could save her now. The neighbors she had bullied, intimidated, and lied to for years watched in silence as she was handcuffed. She made one last desperate excuse: "It was all Hartley. They forced me." Nobody believed her. She tripped over a paint can, left deliberately as a reminder of her undoing, and muttered under her breath, "It was just business." The room burst into laughter. The trial was swift. With Morrison's testimony, Walter's evidence, and that damning video, her guilt was undeniable. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, ordered to pay restitution, and permanently stripped of her real estate license. Hartley Development, now under federal investigation, eventually paid millions in fines and abandoned their project altogether. The fraudulent easement was erased from county records. 6 months later, my ranch stood safe and untouched. Ironically, the fence Pamela had vandalized was now painted in bold red, blue, and yellow. Her original graffiti, now part of an art piece we proudly displayed at our first annual neighborhood barbecue. That day, I stood before my neighbors and said, "We learned something important. Bullies thrive on fear and silence. But when a community stands together, when we speak out and hold the line, no matter how powerful the enemy, corruption crumbles." The crowd roared in support. Walter watched from the back, smiling as movers hauled Pamela's belongings from her foreclosed home. That evening, I sat on my porch, reading my father's old letter one more time. "Stand tall, son. Justice comes to those who wait and fight." The gate creaked in the breeze. Neighbors waved goodnight, united and no longer afraid. And just like that, I had taken down an HOA dictator, with nothing but brains and a few cans of paint. But I've heard that developer is sniffing around again. Don't worry, I'll be ready. So, how would you handle an HOA dictator like Pamela? Share your story below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more true stories packed with karma, justice, and jaw-dropping decisions. This is BD Stories, where real people make really bad choices, and we make sure you hear every twist.